Hello. Well, Jasdeep, thank you so much for joining me today for this virtual Ocean Pavilion interview. I would like to start with a round of introductions, although we have been introduced to each other before. So I'll just go through my formal introductions first, and then I ask you to introduce yourself before I give a brief background on the virtual Ocean Pavilion and the purpose of this interview. So my name is Sarah Davidson, and I'll be conducting the interview today. And I was the 2023-2024 Dr. Biliana Csikszentmihalyi Fellow with the Global Ocean Forum. And that is what has brought me here today. I led their efforts on their COP28 Virtual Ocean Pavilion, among other things. And now I'm continuing to stay affiliated with them through some volunteer work. Currently, I'm a project coordinator with a US firm called Kearns and West that does facilitation, mediation, and conflict resolution, where I work mostly on marine, freshwater, and energy-related projects. And I'm also a member of the North American Working Group for the Citizen of the Ocean Project, which is a youth-led world forum that's supported by the EU, Nausicaa, Youth for Ocean Forum, Early Career Ocean Professionals, and the World Ocean Network, among other supporters. And this working group is currently working to tackle some of the issues related to Ocean Decade challenges through a series of workshops and summits. And we ultimately will present our recommendations and results of those workshops at a forum at the UN Ocean Conference this summer. So that's a little bit about me. Would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Sarah. And again, thank you to the Global Ocean Forum for inviting me to do this interview. And so, yes, my name is Jasdeep Randhawa, and I am the Ocean and Climate Change Lead at the UNFCCC Secretariat. And in this capacity, I support the co-facilitators of the mandated Ocean and Climate Dialogue. And also I lead on all the UN processes on the ocean as relevant to our process on climate. And I'm very happy to be here and speak a little bit about what the Secretariat and the parties to the Convention and Paris Agreement are doing to integrate the ocean under the UNFCCC process.
Thank you. And I know you're already in Baku ahead of COP29 starting. So again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm going to give a brief background on the Virtual Ocean Pavilion and the purpose of this interview before we get started. As you know, the Virtual Ocean Pavilion is a free online platform that's dedicated to raising the visibility of the ocean and showcasing why the ocean matters in these climate negotiations and to all life on our planet. The VOP, it aims to democratize the ocean at COPs and to promote unity and inclusivity while also increasing knowledge, commitment, and action for this ocean climate nexus at key events at COP29 in Baku, as it did at COP26, 27, and 28, pardon me. It's also a key tool for increasing transparency and equitable access to climate discussions and information. And that's really what's at the heart of the Virtual Ocean Pavilion. As I said earlier, it's about democratizing the ocean at COP and making sure that this topic is accessible to all to engage with. And as a part of that, the VOP aims to showcase a selection of interviews with party negotiators and key stakeholders to gain a better insight into the COP29 process. While also enabling individuals such as myself that will not be attending COP29 to directly engage with the process. So that's a bit about the Virtual Ocean Pavilion and the purpose of today's interview. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just jump right in. So the first question I have for you, you've already stated your name and affiliation and your role. So it would be helpful if you could start off with an explanation for our viewers, for the youth that might be engaging with COP this way, about where parties currently stand with negotiations and some major items relating to the ocean that party negotiators are deciding on. And I know they're calling it the finance COP. I believe that's the term already being used. So if you want to speak specifically to that or more broadly, you're welcome to.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that question. So, as I stated, one of the aspects of supporting the co-facilitators of this process of the Ocean Dialogue is convening parties and observers at COP29 to discuss the outcomes and the key messages from the report of the Ocean Dialogue, and also listen to their expectations for the ocean at COP29. And I think at this point, it would be useful for your viewers to understand a little bit about how over the past COPs, the ocean has been placed under the UNFCCC process. The ocean is actually both a part of the convention and the Paris Agreement, and including the preamble of the Paris Agreement, which considers it as part of the biodiversity and calls it the Mother Earth. And we do know, and this was the IPCC special report on the ocean and the cryosphere in a changing climate, which did emphasize how important the role of the ocean was in regulating the Earth's climate and also as a global response to the climate change. That said, it was not until the 2019 COP25, the Chile Madrid Time for Action, that governments recognized the need to strengthen the understanding of and action on the ocean and climate change under the UNFCCC. And then we come to the Glasgow Climate Pact, or COP26, where parties invited the relevant work programs and the constituted bodies under the UNFCCC to consider how the ocean could be integrated into their work plans and mandates. And then we come to COP27, where parties are encouraged to start integrating ocean-based actions into their national climate goals, which includes also the nationally determined contributions, or the NDCs, as we call them. And this was the time when the facilitated annual Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue was finally established. And as per this mandate, parties are to biannually select two co-facilitators who are going to preside, chair, organize, and deliver ocean and climate dialogue during the subsidiary bodies meetings that happens in Bonn. And so now, with the last year's Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue, we did get an outcome in the global stocktake. And the outcome was that, again, the ocean was integrated both into the adaptation and mitigation actions which parties must take to strive to get to the ideal 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature goal. And parties also commended the Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue, and parties were then encouraged to continue strengthening ocean-based action as appropriate. And now come 2024, we've again had a dialogue during the subsidiary bodies meetings. And the report contains a number of key messages, including key messages prepared by the co-facilitators for COP29. And some of these key messages speak towards implementing the existing mandates and specifically emphasize the importance of including ocean-based measures in parties' NAPs and NDCs. And on the NDCs, the co-facilitators, again, this was based on discussions with parties and observers during the Ocean Dialogue. An opportunity is really seen in strengthening ocean-based climate action through the NDCs that are due in February 2025. And under the Paris Agreement, submission of these NDCs in 2025 is obligatory. So this is really an opportunity which is seen through the Ocean Dialogue for parties to use the outcomes and the case studies discussed, including the key messages, into the NDCs. The other opportunity that is seen is around the existing mandates which are being negotiated at COP29. And that includes both on the global stocktake outcome, the ocean-related mandates, and it also includes all the finance mandates, including the NCQG. And to get towards the finance mandates, then they, as you know, the report again contains a number of observations on how access to financing for the ocean is both crucial and how can it be done. So yes, so it's through the report, and then the co-facilitators are also convening parties and observers through a side event in the first week, which I would ask your viewers to consider attending on discussing the outcomes of the report and also listening to parties on what their expectations for the ocean is at COP29. And lastly, I do want to emphasize that ocean is a cross-sectoral issue under the Paris Agreement and also the convention, which basically means that it's both an adaptation and a mitigation issue. So what you see with the ocean is that it needs to be therefore taken up again through relevant constituted bodies and also through these other existing mandates as and when parties can, consider ocean measures as solid goals to showcase or demonstrate the national ambition on the climate.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very great timeline of the past history of how the ocean has been treated in COPs and kind of where we are now. You've already touched on this, but I'd like to see if you can explain a little bit more deeply about your expectations coming to COP29, what you would consider a success for the ocean among the COP29 outcomes. I know you touched on that a little bit already. And so maybe we can even bake into this question, what collaboration is needed and with and among whom in order to make this happen, especially as you so rightly pointed out, it's an intersectoral issue. It crosses boundaries within this COP, even outside of, into other COPs as well.
Thank you for that question, Sarah. And I think this is quite interlinked issue on both your questions. Now, so on the collaboration, the reason we have a dialogue under the ocean is to ensure that we get as much coordinated action on the ocean, cutting across all sectors at all levels and including the parties and observers. And you can't even start overemphasizing how important it is for both the parties and observers to continue engaging in this process. And when I speak about the UNFCCC process, it's also important to think about the synergies with other conventions and with other UN processes. So this includes, for example, the BBNJ agreement. It also includes the CBT and the Montreal Kunming Global Framework. The nice thing is that the Ocean Dialogue has actually demonstrated how effective collaboration can be. And so let's talk about the global stocktake outcome last year. This was really a concerted effort of, parties and observers alike to provide submissions on showcasing, through their own experiences on why ocean should be included in the global stocktake and why it could be a good measure of national climate ambition, including, then through the different national action plans that we have. And in the dialogue itself, we've seen a lot of collaboration till date, and I'm just giving the statistics for the 2023 and the 2024 dialogue. We've had over 450 parties, representatives, and observers who've not just attended the dialogue, but they've also participated in a very substantial way, which also includes, building on the topics, discussing the topics, and also providing the expectations on, what should the dialogue look like. And across both these dialogues, some of the key cross-cutting issues have been international cooperation and collaboration. And so this is something which then you also start seeing in the other processes. For example, the UN Environment Assembly last year actually had a decision on sort of having the ocean dialogue as a very integral part of their work on climate and the ocean. And then you also have, during these dialogues, we have several UN agencies participate in the dialogue, provide contribution. And so do we have the constituted bodies. And so therefore, it's really a whole of a society approach, which also, and I'm happy to share a little bit more, but there are outcomes which talk about the inclusion of the youth. And the youth have very, very actively participated in both the dialogues. They've delivered statements, and they have also participated as rapporteurs and moderators. So they've really sort of shaped, the future of the dialogue as well. And then it also talks about having inclusion of the indigenous people and the women and more of the vulnerable communities. So in summary, I think, when we want to give a good example of a convening forum, I think it is the dialogue, but also at the same time, it is very important to continue this collaboration and also start thinking about building synergies and building these links with other processes so as to avoid duplication and also streamline concerted efforts.
Certainly, and you've skipped ahead already answering one of my future questions, which was asking about how effective this ocean and climate change dialogue has been. And I think your answer is, in short, it's been very effective, and I hope the momentum continues to grow around it. So I'd like to now zoom in a little bit more, looking at more closely at the national focus. So, in your opinion, how can countries be best supported to increase their understanding of potential ocean solutions? And what can be done to promote efforts to include ocean solutions in their NDCs and NAPs, as you mentioned earlier? So, how can these countries be supported, and what can be done to promote efforts to further include ocean solutions into NDCs and NAPs?
So I guess one of the ways really of supporting the parties on this is by ensuring that the best practices and the case studies, that are being showcased by the counterparts and also by the observers, they are able to have more of an exchange, and they are able to sort of understand how the national ocean-based climate action could look like. And we've had over 550 good practices and case studies that have been exchanged over the last 2 years. And we also see now that parties are reporting on ocean-based measures to demonstrate climate action. Just to give you some statistics from the reporting on the NDCs this year, of the parties that have included an adaptation component in the NDCs, we do have 31% of the parties that do identify ocean ecosystems as a priority sector. And 13% do have quantified targets for fisheries, while we have 12% include a reference to human and climate-induced ocean changes like acidification, extreme weather events, etc. And then you also have 21% parties that do provide information on blue carbon as a priority sector for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, with 71% of that mentioning specifically ocean-based mitigation measures. So when it comes to these stats and it comes to this, parties also point out that, and this also comes in the outcome of the first global stocktake, that capacity building, finance are really the critical enablers for parties to be able to both develop these NDCs and national plans and also to implement them. And so that's the reason why the negotiations which are going to happen at COP29 are so pivotal, because it is on how do we get our finance going so as to ensure that these NDCs, we can support parties on the NDCs as well. And I think the second aspect to that is also with the national adaptation plans. And again, it goes to the outcome of the first global stocktake. Now, there are some very, good or encouraging or promising statistics regarding the inclusion of ocean-based measures in 53 NAPs that have been submitted by parties. And this is a count as of, March of this year. We do have half of the parties that did identify agriculture and food security as a priority area, which also includes fisheries and aquaculture. And 22 NAPs do identify coastal and low-lying zones as a priority area in which action is deemed key to reduce the vulnerability to climate change. But ultimately for this, yes, exchange and sharing of experiences on NDCs and how ocean-based measures could look like are very important. But so is getting the finance, and so is the capacity building. And these are issues which just don't need to be highlighted, but these are issues that also need to be decided on, how do we get the ball rolling?
I see. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, your statistics are very powerful. Of course, myself and perhaps yourself as well wish those statistics were higher. But I think you're spot on about capacity building and financing, being key enablers. And, on that point, I'm curious if in addition to NDCs and NAPs, is there really any other ways that countries can best leverage existing processes and actions to strengthen ocean and climate action? Or is it really that NDCs and NAPs, that's kind of the main avenue for countries?
Not true. Actually, there are lots of avenues, and I'm glad you're asking this question. And I think it's also important for your listeners to know a little bit more about the other processes. So the other one is also the transparency arrangements that we have under the convention. So basically, what does transparency means? It is the reporting and review of relevant climate information and data of countries' greenhouse gas emissions, and also the progress towards, targets, both climate change impacts and the capacity building needs. And so the objective of having this sort of transparency goal is to build trust, credibility, and accountability. So that, these developing country parties are able to implement the provisions of both the Paris Agreement and the Convention. Now, we do know, and I think, I would really encourage your readers to go back to the outcome of the first global stocktake, that it does emphasize the crucial role of the full implementation of this transparency framework. And therefore, it makes it mandatory for parties to submit their first biannual transparency report by 31st December 2024. And we are not very far from that. And so this is an area where, we need to see more reporting on the ocean. And again, I go back to what I said, that the ocean is a cross-cutting issue. So yes, the BTRs are a very good avenue. The other one is also on the NBSAPs, and the NBSAPs are the biodiversity action plans, the National Biodiversity Action Plans, which comes under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And those NBSAPs, there is again an opportunity now with the outcome of the first global stocktake, which confirms the very critical interlinkages between climate, biodiversity, and also the ocean. And so again, this opens an opportunity for parties to streamline, their reporting targets on these aspects, on these sectors, both under the Paris Agreement and the CBT as well. And again, this is another opportunity that comes through the Ocean Dialogue, where the co-facilitators speak towards that opportunity. And then we have the newly ratified BBNJ agreement, which talks about the marine protected areas and sort of, establishing these and also reiterating the 30 by 30 goal. And so again, there is an opportunity over there for parties when they ratify that. And I think finally, there are other processes under the UNFCCC, which also includes the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Workshop on implementation of agriculture and food security, which is an agenda item. And where, again, this could be a potential issue. And then we also obviously do have some alliance also, or it's called the CRFS Alliance, which is, it aims to support workshops and knowledge sharing of good practices and fostering synergies across various initiatives on climate resilient food systems. And a lot of the countries have actually, included aquaculture, which was one of the topics of the Ocean Dialogue as well, in their indices and through this alliance as well. So yes, so in short, and then finally, we also do have our constituted bodies, including the Technology Executive Committee and the Standing Committee on Finance, and also the Local Indigenous Peoples Platform. And these constituted bodies also, again, through the Glasgow mandate, are integrating ocean-based measures as well. And so there are lots of ways to again support parties, and also for parties to find avenues on where they find it appropriate to report on the ocean.
Thank you for that. And with an eye on the time, I think I just have time to ask you one more question. And you already kind of touched on another question I was going to ask. So thank you for speaking about, what can also be done within the UNFCCC work streams. I'd like to end with asking you, how can we incentivize nature-based solutions? You talked about, we need to highlight the funding, we need to make a decision on the funding, but, what strategies and mechanisms should be explored to close this ocean finance gap? And, also what do you think might be contributing to the lack of funding that we currently see?
Thank you, Sarah. And I think it's a very important question also, given the timing on the finance. So nature-based solutions, it's quite well established, including under the UNFCCC process, that nature-based solutions can really help us to sequester carbon, and they can also provide us with support for livelihoods. And the one thing which has sort of, and again, this comes from discussions convened through the dialogue, the one thing that has been consistently pointed out is that developing countries, specifically the SIDS and the LDCs, actually do lack access to sustainable finance, and also have very significant capacity building needs to sort of, both develop and implement these nature-based solutions. And for this, a number of solutions have been provided, and some of them have actually been demonstrated through case studies from countries and also from observers who are implementing these projects in cooperation with parties. And one thing they say is that it's really important that we sort of scale these financial flows. So this would actually require very clear messaging on the part of the government, to align public finance and also develop very innovative financial instruments to lower these market barriers and costs and the related risks. And towards this, and it also goes back to collaboration aspect that you were mentioning, it is important for the private sector to really participate in this. And again, in terms of both developing these innovative instruments, and there are examples like the blue bonds and blended finance facilities, including PPPs, and also sort of ensuring that we continue engaging with these international financial institutions and climate funds such as the TCF and GEF. And so this is one aspect. And the other aspect also is on sort of having very tailored long-term financing for supporting local initiatives on nature-based solutions. And you mentioned incentives. It is very important to have financial incentives, which are based on, having results-based payments for driving these large-scale, ecosystem restoration projects on nature-based solutions as well.
Sure, thank you. Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to see if any of the things that you just highlighted there really come to a head at this year's Finance COP. As I said, keeping an eye on the time. I think that's all we have time for today. So I really just want to thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated the opportunity to interview you today. And with that, I'd like us to consider the interview complete.
Thank you so much again to Global Ocean Forum and Sarah for the interview.